Cortez City Council work session. Today is Tuesday, September 10th, 2024, and the time 6:30 p.m. We'll start with item A, which is a water rate discussion, series part 1, presented by our Public Works Director, Brian Peckins.
It's on. Can you hear me now? Okay. Yeah, we're gonna, as we get prepared to set 2025 water rates, we're gonna have a series of water discussions and provide some background information. Still can't hear?
Yeah, I think you have to lean into it.
Okay, is that better?
That's great.
Okay, yeah, as we get ready to set our 2025 water rates, we're gonna have a series of discussions and provide some background information on our water treatment facilities, capacity, and that sort of thing. And then, subject to your questions, we'll provide additional information. With me this evening is Ian Roberson. He's our water conservation specialist and assistant engineer. And also Randy Hunt, who's our water treatment plant superintendent. And with that, I'll go ahead and get started. You've all got a briefing package with you. The first slide is a little bit about the water treatment plant capacity. The original treatment plant was built back in the 1950s. Conventional treatment plant, capacity of about 6 million gallons a day. Back in 2007, they added a membrane treatment portion of the facility with a 4 million gallon per day capacity. So total, the design capacity of the treatment plant is 10 million gallons per day. However, there's some limiting factors. Low water temperatures decrease the flow rates through the filters. High water turbidity could also decrease flow rates. There's downtime for cleaning, backwashing, repair and maintenance of the filters as well. So realistically, the maximum flow through the water treatment plant is about 6 million gallons per day on a consistent basis. For a short period of time, we could probably flow 8 million gallons a day through the plant under optimum conditions, but not on a consistent basis. Next slide is a little bit about the...
Sorry to interrupt, but is there, do you have a way to put your slides up on the screen? Just because I think we have some people that are interested, and I want to make sure anyone who wants to watch can also see.
Yeah, it'll take just a minute, but we can...
Yeah, thank you.
Next slide, yeah. Okay, just a little bit on the McPhee Reservoir.
Mayor Pro Tem, if I can break in for a second. Brian, since we didn't put this up and the community would probably like to see it at all, maybe since we're about 2 minutes into it, let's just start again.
Okay.
Would that be permissible?
Sure.
Thank you.
Not a problem. Okay, back to the water treatment plant capacity. The total water treatment plant design capacity is 10 million gallons per day. The original plant was built in the 1950s, had a capacity of about 6 million gallons per day, and then we added in 2007 a membrane treatment portion of the plant, which has a capacity of another 4 million gallons per day. However, there's limiting factors on the flow: low water temperatures, high water turbidity, downtime for cleaning, backwashing, repair and maintenance of filters all decrease the flow rates. So the maximum flow rate through the water treatment plant is probably 6 million gallons per day on a consistent basis, and we could probably flow 8 million gallons a day under optimum conditions, but not for a very long time. Next slide is on the McPhee Reservoir. We've got a listing of the allocations. As you can see, the main takeaway from this slide is on the right-hand side, the pie chart. 85% of the McPhee allocations are for agricultural and irrigation use, and the Cortez municipal and irrigation water rights are less than 1% of McPhee's total storage. Those are the water rates that we have. Any questions on that? Okay, the next slide is the Cortez water rights portfolio. We have three different water rights. We have senior ditch rights for agricultural and irrigation use. The total for that is about a little over 1,500 acre feet a season. And then we have project water, which is what we primarily use for municipal and industrial use. That's 2,300 acre feet per year. And then we've got some MVI shares for agricultural and irrigation use. That's about 800 acre feet per season. Okay, next slide. Historical usage. For the past 10 years, the average production demand during the winter time, we're calling that from November to February, is 1.25 million gallons per day. The average production for the remaining 8 months is 2.8 million gallons per day, and in the summer it gets higher. During peak summertime months, demand can reach as high as 6 million gallons per day, although we haven't hit that for a little while. Average single-family residential usage in the winter is 6,660 gallons per month, and in the summer it goes up to 11,670 gallons per month. And single-family residential use is the largest water user in the system, with the highest water use from June to September. Actually, the cost to provide water. The actual water treatment plant operation cost for the city to treat 1,000 gallons of water is $4.85, and we can break that down at a future meeting. This does not include the transmission and distribution costs to convey the water from the treatment plant to the consumer. And again, as I think most of us know, the current water revenue does not provide enough revenue to cover the costs of repairs, maintenance, and needed improvements to the water system infrastructure. We've talked at some length about the 129,000 linear feet of cast iron pipe. Okay, next slide. We did some comparisons with some other Western Slope communities on what they're doing for their water rates. You can see there's 15 different communities on the left side, and we've got Cortez, our current rate, which, you know, we've got we moved away in July. We moved away from the tiered rates to a single rate of a base rate of $31.80 per 1,000 gallons, and everything after that is $3.73 per 1,000 gallons. And just you can look at this at your convenience, but at the higher uses, at 40,000 gallons and up to 80,000 gallons, when we were doing the tiered, we were one of the highest rates. We were first and second, and now that we've gone down to the single rate, we're one of the lowest in price compared to the other communities. If you go to the next slide, it's we've got a bar chart that kind of displays, you know, the different the cost per single families for different use rates. We've got the base rate for 10,000 gallons, 20,000, 40,000, and 80,000. So you can see at the tiered rates, we were kind of near the top, but now at a single rate, we're much lower. We're more toward the bottom of the list. And then just a summary of the comparative rates. Out of 13 comparable Western Slope communities, Cortez and Montrose are the only communities with a single tier for single-family residential water consumption. The remaining 12 communities employed a tiered rate structure featuring a range that varies from 2 to 6 tiers. Under its current single-tier system with $3.73 per 1,000 gallons, Cortez is among the least expensive communities for water usage, around 20,000 gallons, while also being the second least costly for consumption levels, about 40,000 gallons. Back when we had the tiered rates from January 1 to July 1, positioned Cortez among the highest in terms of costs. Once consumption surpassed approximately 16,000 gallons, we were only surpassed by Monticello, Utah. That's some basic information that we thought we'd throw out, subject to any questions, and we'll provide a series of other briefings with additional information based on questions. And
Is commercial on a different tier than residential?
yes,
So do you have that information on what a car wash would pay?
offhand, I mean, we could figure that out, but
It would depend completely on usage, of course. All we would have to do is calculate current tier structure since for multifamily residential costs, they're still at the two-tier system. All we have to do is just go back and compare their usage for cost of water as it stands.
Are they on the same tier system as residential?
No, sir. They are on a two-tier system. They have 0 to 36,000 gallons, then over 36,000 gallons. They are, what is it? The second tier is $5.08 per 1,000 gallons. I can't remember what the first is. I believe it's shortly over $3 per 1,000 gallons. So.
also, while we've got a minute, I'd like to, if you may know.
And if it would please the council, I have an actual piece of a. Bring it up and show it to you.
I have a question. I have a question regarding the communities that we used for comparisons. So by far, it's looking like we're looking at tiered water use providers, basically, in this comparison. Do you have any idea about in the Four Corners region, which is, or the Colorado Plateau, however you want to look at us, how many communities are using a tiered water system versus those that are using a more flat sort of a rate, usage rate?
Well, in the table, there's a fair few of them. I can't speak on Arizona, but I know that Farmington and Durango, Mancos, all of our surrounding local communities, they're all on tiered systems now. I don't know about Arizona. We didn't look at Arizona, but Monticello is also, of course, on tiered as well. Dove Creek is, of course, in Colorado, but pretty close to Utah. And even our Montezuma Water Company, that's the utility for the county, is also tiered rate structure as well.
But we can certainly look at Arizona and get a comprehensive view of the Four Corners Plateau.
I just think it'd be a good idea to look a little bit more at some more Utah and other Colorado towns too, just as an example, because I know that there are a multitude of proponents who are focusing on the tiered water system, and I'm not saying I agree with them or I disagree with them. I'm just curious as to why we're so much leaning in that direction at this point in time. So
Yeah, we can do some further study on that.
Part of the reason too for the tiered rates, it's actually.
Yeah.
Is that better?
You can use this one. It's taller.
Can you hear me now? I hate to be the old Verizon commercial. So one of the reasons why we moved to tiered rates is it's actually becoming a requirement for certain regulatory compliances in the state of Colorado, particularly when it comes to applying for grants. If we want to apply for any sort of grant funding from the state, that's typically a requirement. Also for various drought contingencies, it's also a requirement that we have a tiered rate structure. So as we move more into a populated American Southwest and an arid American Southwest, more and more communities are beginning to adopt that. And by communities, I mean state. We have the ability to choose our own direction, but generally it's prudent to create a tiered rate system to try and help. It does several things. Largely it's to encourage conservation, but it's also to try and ascribe the higher users to a more proportional share of cost. It's kind of an equity-driven argument.
I understand what you're saying, and I do get the vibe that it is being that it's a more encouraged way to go nowadays from whatever sources it may be coming from. But I would be interested, if you're quoting that it's going to be a requirement for us, I would be interested in hearing who's going to make this requirement of us, if we're going to be, if it's actually written down at this point in time, or if it's just a suggested thing in the future or whatever. And if that were the case, if we're looking at tiered as being the way to go, is there any requirements for, like, in our tiered system that we took on, initially this last one, it was very, very small increments, basically. I get it if you're using 90,000 gallons a month. That's definitely way above and beyond. But at what point, from an average user of, say, 7 to 14,000 gallons in the summer to 90, there's a big difference in there. And I'm all for, quote, equity in that case, to a certain degree, but not necessarily for a family of 4 who's running sprinklers and washers and that sort of thing too. So I'd just be curious to have some facts based on that.
Well, I think that's a great point, and I think that's something that we can continue to look into moving forward to make sure that the tiered rates aren't what the state's pushing down on us, but something that reflects the needs and benefit of our community. So that's something that we'll continue to look into as we get our costs a little more dialed in and try and come up with a little more streamlined options for the future.
And I think to the point that what you just mentioned, and to kind of support what April was saying, Kevin, I think that, personally, I don't have a problem with the tiered system. It makes a lot of sense, and I appreciate the data that you did give us and just the numbers of communities that do use a tiered system. It's about scale, really. So if we kind of look at like what is appropriate and applicable for our community, what's reasonable in terms of prices for individual homes versus businesses or whatnot, I think that's really kind of where we need to look at. And having just said all of that, we need to look at that pipe that you just showed us. We need to be really crunching the numbers and saying, are we able to do the job that we're supposed to be doing in delivering water safely to the community? Because I don't think there's anyone out there that would argue with the fact that we would like safe, clean water delivered to our homes whenever we turn on the faucet for drinking and bathing and all of our daily needs. So I think that all of those factors need to come into it, and I think a tiered system is fine, personally. I think that we need to find one that really fits and is applicable for our community in terms of the cost.
I would just like to I agree with Council Member Randall in that really want to find out what's driving the tiered system. I'm really not buying into it right now. I don't know what other commodity, like oil's a precious resource. We don't have a tiered system when we buy more fuel. I've got issues with that, and I just need more information because I need to know what's driving this.
Well, I think that's a really good point, Councilman. Thank you. And we will continue to look into more of that information. We have a basic understanding of our fixed costs. We're still getting a hold of a handle of our variable cost, and that'll kind of tie into our distribution cost. So once we've taken a more thorough analysis of that and we understand, specifically for our community, what it costs to treat the water, what it costs to send it down the pipe, then I think we'll be able to come up with a better solution that's a better fit. And that may or may not be a tiered rate structure, but we'll have a much better idea probably by the end of, as soon as the end of next year, as far as what those costs are exactly.
The other thing I wanted to add to that is when I look at the pie chart here on McPhee, we're a very small user of that. So it doesn't matter how much conservation we do, and I'm totally in favor of conserving water, but there's a cost attached to that. But no matter how much we do, we're a small player, and if there's an engine that's driving the tiered system, you know, I would question too, why aren't ag users doing that as well? You know, they're the biggest consumer. The more you use, you know, it seems like our water laws are pretty antiquated, and the old adage is use it or lose it, you know. That to me needs to change, because that's going to have a dramatic impact on water.
Yeah, I'd just like to comment on that. I did go to the American Waterworks Association conference this June, and Utah especially is looking at their water rates so that they don't penalize users if they conserve. You know, right now it is if you don't use it, you lose it, but Utah's taking a look at that, and I'm sure Colorado will at some point in the future.
So.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, okay. I had a few questions. So are we going to be able to calculate the cost of transmission and distribution of the water from the plant to consumers?
So that's one of our goals for the upcoming year in 2025, to take a more in-depth analysis and look at that. Most of what we've looked at up until this point has been the actual treatment, which would be the water treatment plant, the chemicals, the pumps, that sort of thing. We haven't really taken a thorough look at what it costs to send the water down through the pipe. So we don't know what the cost is for a user a mile down the line versus 3 miles down the line. So that'll be the objective of our focus next year, to try and get those variable costs and those transmission costs dialed in, so that when we come back with another rate suggestion, it'll more accurately reflect our actual costs.
Okay, thank you. And then I just want to say that the tiered system to me makes sense. I think the equity piece of it and charging consumers based on how they're using our infrastructure makes sense to me. I think it's really about dialing in the tiers and making sure that they're appropriate for our community, so we don't end up in the situation like we were in before. And I still think that just because Cortez has a small share of McPhee Reservoir doesn't mean that conservation isn't a key part of living in the desert, where water is a small thing. We live in the desert in a town without a river. And I also like to look at it on a much larger scale. We're all in this Four Cornea together, and the water that we don't use gets used by people downstream for drinking, for agriculture. And I also really support our agricultural heritage in the county and allowing those users. And it does sound like the county uses a tiered system. And looking in this packet, everyone in the western slope in the state, except for us and Montrose, are on a tiered system. So it's also incredibly important that we are on a system that allows us to apply for grants and funding. As you guys know, a lot of our projects are partially funded through grants through the state and other entities. So if we don't have that baseline or system that is required to apply for those grants, that's only going to slow the progress of our infrastructure updates. We've seen this time and time again with like the housing needs assessment. That was something that we needed in order to apply for housing grants. You had to have that documentation, and if those are the modern standards, I'd like to learn more about that and support the city in being able to apply for grants and funding as we move forward.
Also, Kelly Koskie, I'm looking at you. This is an enterprise fund, correct? So I think that's really important for us to share to the public what enterprise fund is, how an enterprise fund operates, and in terms of your calculations, more than just transmission and distribution costs, we need to look at the whole enchilada. It's not just, it's that people need to understand that this is an enterprise fund and it needs to pay the bills and look towards the future as well. So I think that's a really important part of public education.
I think that's a great point, and as you continue to do your research, I would like to know how many of these municipalities have an enterprise for their water.
I would also like to say thank you for coming before us and standing like this. It's awesome that you're doing it, and you're helping to educate us and educate the public, and I think it's a very great thing. One question I would have when we come to the tiered water system, because it looks like it could be a feasible thing for us moving forward, particularly if it's a requirement for us, so we've got to fit in with what's right. But my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but in the SEH report that came out a year and a half ago, however long it was, they mentioned in there that traditionally speaking in water distribution situations, that the usage fee is utilized to pay for the distribution, basically the treatment of the water, and that the hookup fee or the line fee or whatever you want to call the hookup fee is used for the infrastructure per se. Is that a truism or not?
So I don't know if I'd necessarily call it a truism so much as I'd call it standard practice. So typically what community...
Call it what, I'm sorry?
Standard practice.
Standard practice,
More
okay.
so than a truism. Typically what communities have decided is that new development should pay for expansion of infrastructure. But typically what happens under that model is you get new development that comes in and it pays for the new pipelines that go out to the new development. But then the interior of the city goes neglected because new development tends to push outward, and that's driven by market prices. So what you end up happening is you end up with this ring of new development around a deteriorating core. So that's not necessarily, we're seeing now, that's not necessarily best practice. So there's a little bit of a shift away from that as far as engineering best practice goes. But it is good to be aware of that as far as what was mentioned in the report. So I think it'll be one of those things where we're going to have to look to the drawing board a little bit to find some innovative strategies that work for our community, for our specific application, because we're not we're not Detroit, we're not Denver, we're Cortez, we're in the Four Corners. We need to make sure that we're coming to the table with solutions that fit our community and our budget and are going to ultimately build our future.
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you so much for coming and starting this discussion over again, and for the visual aid, that's really helpful, and I look forward to further discussions and answering these questions and get more questions from the public. If anyone has any, send them our way, so thank you.
Great, thank you.
So we'll move on to item B, which is tips and pointers on ClearGov program, presented by our Finance Director, Kelly Koskie.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. So, as you know, this has been a busy budget season, as every budget season always is for us. We have been diligently working through every single account line item in the entire general ledger for this budget. Once Drew and I are done meeting with all of the departments, then it'll be your turn to review every single one of the account line items in the budget. It will start with an email from ClearGov, and within that email there will be a link that takes you to the City of Cortez section. And also within that email I will include a short video for you, just as kind of a refresher, so that you can reference back to that at any time as you're going through it. You can watch it, pause it as you're going through this exercise, and I find that to be very helpful for most people. So once you receive your email, you'll actually go to a site that looks just like this. You'll go to the spot where it says sign in. And then your user ID is going to be your email address. For those of you that are new, you're going to get to create a password. But for those of you that are not new, the system should remember your password for you. So once you log in, your screen is going to look like this. And one of the first things that I always do is I click on this little caret over here. This little blue ribbon is really just kind of in the way, and it'll free up some space for you so that you can see more of the account numbers that are in there. So the 2025 budget is called the 2025 All Funds budget, and so that should be at the very top of the list for you on the left-hand side. So this will take you to what we call a worksheet, and this is where you'll be able to see all of the numbers that the department heads are proposing for the budget for 2025. There is a lot of information in here, and I would just remind you that every time you see a caret, that's what they call this little thing right here. I'd rather call it an arrowhead, but the techie world calls it a caret. So every time you see a caret, click on it. This is the general fund at the very beginning. And you notice when you click on there, it has both revenue and expense. So if you click on the revenue, that'll bring up every single line item that we have in our revenue. If you click on the expense, then that will bring up all of the line items that are in the expense. And you'll notice that in the general fund, we have several different departments, like the city council, the city attorney, human resources, all of those that are in our regular general fund. One thing that I'll say that might help you quite a bit as you move through this is the line items that are in these budgets should follow closely to the financial statements that you receive in your packets and that are also available online. So this should follow very closely to the financial statements that we have. Just a couple of other tips and tricks for you as you're going through all of these different account numbers. If there's one in particular that you're wondering, gee, I wonder what is in there. What are we doing for this one particular line item? If you'll go over to this section that says account ID, and you just start to type in the account number. We'll use general fund just because that's at the front. And you do need to remember to put the dashes in the account numbers. Then that actually will scrunch down. You can put in the entire account number so it'll go directly to a specific account number, or you can put in, for example, if you just want to know the revenue for the general fund, you can just put in like the first two sequences and it will take you right there. So that'll be helpful as you go through all of the review process. One other thing to note is that there is a ton of information in ClearGov. It holds all of the information that are budget and actual numbers from 2017 forward. So if you're thinking, wow, I'd like to see a different bit of information to compare to what we have for the proposed budget, that is over in this section. kind of hidden away on the right-hand side, but it's called columns. And if you click there, that will give you all of the information that is within ClearGov. So if you wanted to compare, for example, the 22 to the 23 budget, or you wanted to compare the 24 budget to the proposed 25, it's easy to do that. You can simply click on any of these columns over here, and it will create another column over in this area for you. So one other item that is possibly going to make it a bit easier for you to navigate through this is this maximize that is over on the blue ribbon right up here. If you click on that, that maximizes the entire screen, makes it a little easier to see what you're working with, and just fills up the whole screen with the columns that you've got selected. You can see that I've got the 25 in progress as one of my columns. And as we scroll over, the 25 baseline is the information that I sent to all of the department heads. So as Drew and I are going through our meetings with our department heads, I like to take a look at the difference between the numbers that I sent to the departments, the changes that were made, and what it looks like now. One other item, or a couple of other items that are going to be really helpful for you as you go through this, are the columns that say comments and attachments. This is the comments. This column will show you the number of comments that are out there. You can simply click on there, and that will show you the conversation that we had internally about that specific line item as we were going through the budget process. This is a place where I ask questions of the directors, and they can ask questions of me. I can, find out, how did we come up with this number? What did we use? How did we use this? Was this an average? So there's a lot of information out there that will probably answer a lot of your questions for you. And then also the attachments, which is right next to it. So it'll tell you what the attachment is about, and you can simply download that. Normally it goes much faster, but usually what's in the attachments are going to be quotes that people have asked for this specific line item. That could be memos, it could be PDFs, it could be a JPEG, a picture of something. And so as you go through this, that is also going to be really helpful to try to figure out, well, how did we come up with this number? Or what do we have for our backup documentation? That should all be out in the attachments. Another helpful place is the tab called Attachments. If you don't want to have to sort through, and if you know the account number and you want to see those attachments, that's fine. But say, for example, you wanted to see all of the attachments that we have for the entire budget. On this tab right here that's called Attachments, if you click there, it will bring up for you every single attachment that is in the budget. It'll tell you what it's named. It'll tell you who attached it And you can also open the attachment from here too. So just an easier way to see everything all in one place. So I think that's all of the tips and the tricks that I have for right now. Do any of you guys have any questions yet?
Nope, it looks like we're just ready to dive into ClearGov. Thank you so much, Kelly.
Thank you so much. And always, if you have questions or if you're struggling, it's acting glitchy or you just can't get to where you want to be or you just can't see what you want to see, you can always reach out to me with a phone call or email. Always available and happy to help.
Yeah, thank you. We really appreciate that. Happy budgeting.
Thank you.
All right, up next we have item C, which is a presentation on the possible marijuana licensing moratorium presented by City Attorney Patrick Coleman.
Thank you, Madam Mayor Pro Tem and Council. I was asked to address the legal issues that might be encountered in the event Council wanted to pursue a moratorium on the licensing of new recreational marijuana establishments. You have a memo in front of you. I'll essentially summarize it for you. Basically, the short answer is yes, the council has the legal authority to adopt moratoriums for basically any action that you regulate through your ordinances and resolutions. Typically, a moratorium is done when the council recognizes that the existing regulations may not be adequate to address the impacts of a certain industry or business or activity, and they want to suspend approvals and denials, essentially the processing of the regulatory process for that particular activity while the council reviews the regulations and attempts to decide if changes to the regulations are necessary. In the context of retail marijuana establishments, our current regulations do not have a limit on the number of establishments that may be approved. There are some restrictions, primarily with regards to distance between the existing establishments and any possible new establishment, and distance from schools. Those are the primary ones. I would note that when the council adopted the retail marijuana code, it made the distance requirement more restrictive than the state. The state allows for establishments to be 1,000 feet or greater from a school or an existing establishment. Our regulations have increased that to 1,500 feet. So we already are more restrictive, but that doesn't limit our ability to increase the distance requirement if that was something that was desired by council. Other possible regulatory changes could be implementing a cap on the number of establishments that could be licensed, regardless of distance. And I'm sure there's some other controls out there or methods for managing the number of establishments, and certainly if this is something that council wanted to pursue, I think staff could certainly do some research and check with other communities that have restrictions on the number. of establishments. But the main thing is your moratorium doesn't change the regulations. It just puts things on pause while you study the issue. And that's generally 6 months to a year. You get much out beyond that, then it starts to look like you're essentially banning what your regulations allow. And my recommendation would be that if you want a longer moratorium, you might consider just amending your code to not allow any additional retail marijuana establishments, if that's the direction you want to go. But you certainly have the ability, and not just with relation to marijuana, but land use. Moratoriums are very typical, used in land use applications where the demand and the growth outstrips the capacity of the regulations to manage it. And so it is possible to do it, and you would have to go through an ordinance process to adopt the moratorium, which is first reading, it's introduced, and then 2 weeks later you have a second reading and a public hearing. Our charter does allow for emergency ordinances that can be adopted on first reading without going to the second reading. You would essentially have your public hearing on first reading, but those are limited to areas where the ordinance is necessary to preserve the public safety and health, and it requires a 2/3 vote of the council, and you have to list your justifications for why you think an emergency ordinance is necessary. So you would want to think about whether or not pausing more or approvals of retail marijuana applications was an emergency that couldn't wait 2 more weeks. And it may be, but it certainly there are some criteria that you have to meet in order to adopt an emergency ordinance. With that, I'll take any questions that you might have.
Pat, do we currently have any idea how many or what percentage of municipalities have a cap on the number of marijuana establishments?
I haven't looked into that at all, and Linda may know more. I know most recently Grand Junction, they were kind of late to the game, and they passed it, I think, 3 years ago, and they capped their establishments at 10, and they did a lottery system, so they had more than 10 apply, and 10 were selected through the lottery. They have not built out the 10, and I think it's been 2 years now that they've had it in place. So the demand apparently isn't as great up in Grand Junction as they thought it might be.
So may I kind of ask my fellow council members what the reason why we were considering kind of pursuing this? Maybe that would be a good question to answer. What would be our goal in pursuing something like this?
Sure. Yeah, I'm the person who brought it up, so I think it's probably most appropriate that I answer that. The reason I brought it up is because over at least the last 2 years, we've had data every single month saying that the decline is at least 25% from the same month the previous year. And so we have currently 7 marijuana retail establishments, and there is, I suppose, a question, and I would love if somebody could answer this for me, about the possibility of an 8th location. And I don't think that with 100% certainty we can say whether or not that that could happen. And I think that, in my estimation, what a cap would do would just further support the 7 existing establishments without, if we allowed an 8th one, for example, which I think, and this is just personal opinion, is excessive, that would potentially further hurt some of the existing 7 that are already struggling. So that was more or less my initial thought. So really kind of a pro-business and support the local businesses that, really in a lot of times when other tax revenue is down, marijuana sales tax really helped out the community. And I don't think we should turn our back on the 7 existing ones and potentially allow for an 8th recreational facility in Cortez.
Just for the sake of argument or discussion here, wouldn't that apply to alcohol sales as well? Someone that applies for a new license, that's going to impact other businesses as well. What I'm concerned about is, just making sure that we have equity here in how we operate, and we're not identifying one group.
Yeah, I think that, I think what we saw when the state of Colorado started to allow gas stations and grocery stores, which are much bigger than liquor stores and probably are more commonly frequented by everyone in the population, that we didn't see liquor stores go out of business. We didn't see them taking, a hit. And I think that what we're talking about is just scale, really. That, not probably percentage-wise, a huge amount of people frequent the retail marijuana locations versus a liquor store. And so I don't think it's actually the same.
I think what you're saying is, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that we kind of want to give the existing businesses that are out there that are in the retail marijuana sort of a protective class per se, or protect the businesses that are there, which is, I think, is great in theory. I mean, we're all pro-business here. We want, in the last 8 years, since that we've got records that we were provided with today, the retail marijuana businesses provided $5.5 million in income to the city, and that's a lot of money. It's a lot of money, and that's not counting the state income tax nor the license fees that we collected for them, which is I think $374,000 or something. So that's a lot of money, and I think your motive is good. Here's my kind of problem with this. I know a lot of Mexican restaurant owners that would say, hey, we got plenty of Mexican restaurants right now. Let's put a moratorium on them. And we've got right now a total of about right around 50 across in the city of liquor licenses of some way, shape, or form. And that's a lot, right? And we don't put any limit on that. I just don't know that it's the business of us as a government to be doing that. I just don't, and I could go on and on and on about why I don't know that it's the business of our government to do that, and I'm happy to have that conversation, but I just don't know that this is our place to do that. In the process of looking at this, every action we take, every decision we make, every vote we take has a consequence, and in the process of looking at this, part of the consequence that I came up with was that in the year 2023, council passed a change in the fees for marijuana, for the marijuana establishments. And at that point in time, the initial startup license was $7,000. And that was $7,000 that came into the county, into the city's pocket for a license. Well, we raised that to $12,000, right? So that's a $5,000 increase for anybody who wants to open up a new marijuana retail business. So if let's just say my name is Jane Doe and I want to open a marijuana business here in town right now. If I would have done it last year, it would have cost me $7,000 just for the license. Right now, it cost me $12,000, unless I went to an existing marijuana retail store and said, hey, let's cut a deal, I'll buy your business, whatever it is, and I'll only pay a $2,850 re-registration fee to the city. So that means the city would lose about $9,150 on that license. That's a lot of money for the city to lose on a license. Now that's just, and I don't have any comment on that other than to say what a interesting quirk of fate that we did, from an action that we took on the market. I just don't believe it's government's job or our job to try and tip the scales in the free market business. And I'm not saying I'm pro, or I'm not an opponent, and I'm not an advocate of marijuana use. That's not my point here. The Colorado Constitution made this part of our rules, so we have to accept it and go with it and go with the flow with it. We just have to look what's best for our community, and I just don't feel it's in our scope to limit this, with all respect.
Absolutely, and I say that there are a lot of communities that have made the other decision to have caps on the number of stores for whatever reason, and as Pat mentioned with the example for Grand Junction, it wasn't from the very beginning. And as someone who was on council when those initial licenses were issued, the initial intent, literally, if you can imagine this, way back in the day before a lot of technology, we sat down with maps and we drew circles and said this was what 1,500 feet looks like. So there could be one here, here, and here. And at that time, we thought, oh, there could be 4, possibly 5. And I think what has happened over the years and what was not accounted for was the boundary of the city limits. And so it was kind of a loophole, and you can see with the current businesses that have come in, the most recent ones, Chronic Therapy, New View, the DO Organics, those are all right on the city limits. And I don't think that was ever anticipated. And I think that, the idea, the initial intent was to limit it and say what's reasonable for the character of the city, what's reasonable for the size of the city at that time. And I don't think that we ever were intended to have as many as 7 or as many as 8. I don't think that was the original intent. So, and I'm certainly not trying to go back and be a revisionist in terms of history, but that's certainly from my standpoint, that was the take on it. We thought that 1,500 feet would kind of do the job and limit it for us and be a more reasonable amount.
Well, what I'm kind of gathering from Pat's presentation is, and speaking of caps, is that a moratorium, from my perspective, may not be the appropriate way forward if we do want to put caps on things. I think an amendment to that rule would be the best way forward. I do think it would be wise to look into, because I think the next thing, just forward thinking, that we're going to start dealing with is psilocybin and those types of licenses, now that that's legal in the state. So we just need to be prepared and have good standards for that. So I'm open to learning more about the community caps. And you've told us the Grand Junction cap before, and I've always found that shocking, considering we have 7 stores in Cortez and we're a fraction of the size. Yeah.
So what's the pleasure of council? What instructions should we take back?
I'd
hearing pretty
like to
right.
see a cap. Honestly, I think that the cap should be 7.
I'm open to more information about the cap.
Okay. All right. If I'm hearing council right, then we will gather some more information, come back, and, you know, towards the goal of possibly establishing a cap. So,
Okay, thank you. And on that note, item D on the agenda is general council discussion. Does anyone have anything quickly to bring up? Seeing none,
No, I have a quick question. At our next council meeting, are we going to address Senate Bill 24-131?
we are council member, will be presenting our first reading of it at that time.
Thank you.
The other question I had was having to do with, at one point in time, there was some discussion regarding our response to public comment and what happened when someone came up on public comment and they gave us a concern that they had. And I learned at that time that the reason we have many of our department managers present is that they can address the issue with the individual at the time of the meeting, which is a great thing, because I'm glad to hear that the people are getting the information, but we on council don't get that information consistently. So I was hoping that we might be able to discuss having some sort of a recap, either in the work session or at the beginning of each council, regarding what happened in the public comments last week or last meeting. For example, last week meeting, there was a woman that talked about, she had a concern about the library and all those things that sort of come up. It would be good just to have a quick recap of, hey, this is what's happening with that concern, or the department manager addressed it this way, or whatever. Just a quick recap without getting into too much, so that we know what's happening on those issues.
Okay, fair enough, fair enough, council member and others. We certainly can do that. So thank you.
okay, seeing no more comments, we will adjourn this work session, and we are going to take a 5-minute break before starting our regular meeting, so we'll start at 7:37.